Hey everyone, tonight we're going to talk about sugar beets. Now this is the first question we've got off of our email at asknorthwoods@gmail.com. That's the email we're using for folks to message us with questions, and we'll answer them right here on the YouTube channel. Sugar beets. We had a gentleman message us and ask about, do I put them in? Should I put them in? What are the pros? What are the cons? And we've been selling sugar beets now. I believe this is our 7th year. I've been planting sugar beets, I believe, 9 years on and off. And so I'll kind of give some of the positives, some of the negatives, and this may or may not be something folks want to explore on their property. The thing I like the most about sugar beets is the tonnage. Both the tops and the bulbs are food for the deer. And I think if you took an acre of sugar beets, it's going to be hard pressed to find something else you can plant that's going to rival the amount of tons per acre sugar beets will produce. The late season draw, very, very high attraction late in the year. Is it comparable to corn or beans? I think that's going to hinge on where you are in the country, the big ag states, Iowa, Illinois. Maybe not. I've had a few customers plant them and say they've never touched them. We've also had customers plant them and said they just destroy them with standing corn and beans next to them. I've had customers tell me they've walked through a standing bean field to get to the sugar beets. So I think if the deer have never seen them before, they might not get on them until mid to late January, early February. But we've got a customer in southwest Wisconsin where deer just can't seem to get enough of them. And you're surrounded by thousands of acres of beans and corn. So I think a lot of that, as far as comparable to beans and corn, that's going to be a lot of what's in your local area. Now, I'm going to emphasize, this is a great addition, but I'm going to emphasize if you have space. And what I mean by that is if you're typically have a half-acre food plot, you can plant a 1-acre food plot, you probably don't want to rip that up and put half of it in sugar beets. But if you've got 2, 3, 4, 5-acre destination food plot, a bigger food plot where you can run a strip 10 to 15 feet wide and take up maybe 1/8 to 1/2 of an acre of that 4 or 5-acre food plot, that might be something you want to look at because it's something different than what most of your neighbors are doing. Now, sugar beets, you just don't hear people talk about them a lot. Just because they're not easy to plant, they're not easy to grow, but if you can get them to work, boy, they're phenomenal draw. Now, I'm not going to go and say, well, they'll just draw deer from miles to your food plot. That's simply not true. Nothing like that exists. But I do think if you've got, when we were working on some farms and we had a bigger size 4 or 5-acre food plot, we would always find a place to put a strip of sugar beets in. Now, the negatives, the biggest one, I think people don't plant sugar beets, weed control. Now, these are conventional sugar beets. These are not Roundup Ready. And the two chemicals we found that work for weed control in sugar beets is clethodim, which is the standard grass killer that you would use in like clover or brassicas. Clethodim, and then the broadleaf killer is a very potent chemical called Stinger. Now, Stinger has a residual effect that stays in the ground for a few months, so you're not going to get to overseed much into these sugar beets once you spray the Stinger. Jake Blow, Habitat Pro on YouTube, has a wonderful video. I believe he shot it last year or maybe the year before, where he has sugar beets planted right next to Roundup Ready soybeans, and it was on a little bit of a slope. There was a rain. Some of the residual leaked into the soybeans, killed the soybeans. So you got to be careful with how late you're spraying that Stinger. These are non-Roundup Ready sugar beets that we sell here at Northwoods. The reason is Monsanto forbids wildlife plots to have their Roundup Ready sugar beet in it, and I'm really not in the interest of battling with Monsanto, so I want no part of that, so we don't mess with Roundup Ready sugar beets, which is why you got to go to these chemicals, clethodim and Stinger. Moving them. So if you do end up planting some sugar beets, and what we tell our customers, 2023 they're here, 2024 they're here, 2025 they're here, and then maybe 26 up here, you can rotate back down to here. And what we're trying to do is prevent that disease cycle that you would see typically with a root type plant, such as a brassica. You don't want to plant brassicas 2, 3, 4 years in a row in the same spot. You want to break that cycle up by moving the sugar beets. So you got to move them around a lot. One of the things we found up here the hard way multiple times, is they have to be fenced, or we're looking at Harper Growing Solutions has a spray. It's called Deer Detour. They tried it on brassicas and soybeans last year to keep the deer off of them, and it worked outstanding. So we're probably going to do some tests for Brad. One of the plots up here that we work on, we're going to try some sugar beets and the Deer Detour. But we found by mid to late September, all our sugar beets were always eaten, and we just didn't fence them off, didn't spray them. So that's one of the downfalls, which is why we don't recommend very small food plots, half acre, acre, to have a lot of sugar beets in them, because you got to fence them off or the deer are going to take them right to the ground. The last thing, a lot of fertilizer. Very similar to corn, a lot of triple 19, a lot of nitrogen. Obviously, we want to do a soil test before sugar beets. If you have a soil test company that wants to know what you're going to plant, we would recommend corn, because they're not the same plant, but they kind of use the same amount of nutrients. So you want to make sure you get your P and your K right, and obviously your nitrogen, but they do use a lot of fertilizer. Now, we plant sugar beets in May. I believe the further south you go, Kentucky, down in that region, you guys could probably plant late April. But one of the things we see a lot, and we're going to talk about this in another video, is these companies, seed companies, putting sugar beets in with brassicas. To get those great big sugar beets, you have to plant these in the spring. We actually took some pictures. We planted a couple in August last year to mimic what these companies are asking you to do, and the sugar beet got no bigger than a golf ball. So just kind of keep that in mind. They don't belong with a brassica. They don't belong planted in August. You're not planting you're not planting corn in August to try to get a cob. You're planting this in the spring. Sugar beets are no different. So, to answer this gentleman's question, is it something he needs to look at? I think if you've got some space and you have the understanding that you're going to have a little bit of a weed battle, but you can win on your hands, and you got to take care of weeds, more than likely you're going to have to fence them in, I think it's a really great draw. Is it going to draw deer from miles around? No. I mean, that's just nonsense when people tell you that. Winter, late season browse it's going to depend on winter thermal cover, deer pressure, pressure on the deer being undisturbed. That's the kind of thing that leads to great late season hunting. But sugar beets can be a part of that. I've seen some phenomenal pictures of fields just loaded with deer on these sugar beets. They are a great draw, but let's not get carried away with they're going to draw deer for miles. It's just, again, that's just a marketing gimmick. But anyway, so I hope this helps. I hope this answers some questions. I do believe if you've got some space like we do on one of these bigger plots we're managing this year, we are going to put some sugar beets in. They are non-Roundup ready, so you're going to have to use Stinger and clethodim. If you've got any more questions, if you got different questions, ask northwoods@gmail.com. We don't have the sugar beets on the shelf yet. They should be here probably mid-February. We sell them in 2-pound bags. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you folks in a few days.